It is April 6, 1930. On a beach in the village of Dandi, on the western coast of India, the sun has barely cracked the horizon when a man bends down. He is 61 years old. His body is thin from decades of fasting, thin from years in prison, thin from a life spent carrying the weight of 300 million people. He is wearing a simple white cloth called a dhoti. That's the traditional garment wrapped around the waist and legs, the clothing of the very poorest people in India. He carries a bamboo walking staff. He has no sword. He has no rifle. He commands no army. He bends down, and he picks up a pinch of salt. That is all he does. And yet, standing behind him, watching in absolute silence, are thousands of people. From the dunes, from the fishing villages, from every road that leads to this beach. They have walked for days to see this moment. Some of them are weeping. Some of them are praying. All of them understand, with the full force of their hearts, that something enormous has just happened. Because picking up that salt was illegal. In the British Empire, the largest empire the world had ever seen, an empire so vast the sun never set on its territories, the British government controlled the production and sale of salt in India. Every Indian who wanted salt, the most basic mineral that keeps the human body alive, had to buy it from the British, and pay a tax on it. Even the poorest farmer in the driest village, in the most desperate corner of the country. No one was exempt. And this old man, this slight, half-naked, toothless, bespectacled old man, just picks some up from the ground. Within days, across the entire subcontinent of India, one of the largest collections of humanity on the face of the earth, people were boiling seawater in their courtyards, selling salt in the markets, picking it up from beaches and riverbeds with their bare hands. Men, women, children, grandmothers, merchants, farmers, lawyers, teachers, everyone breaking the same law at the same time in an act of peaceful, deliberate, magnificent defiance. The British Empire, which had ruled India for nearly 200 years, did not know what to do. And that was exactly the point. How did a shy, unremarkable boy from a small coastal town become the man who did this? That is the story we're about to tell. It begins not on a famous battlefield, not in a royal palace, not even in a great city. It begins in a quiet house, in a quiet town by the sea, on the 2nd day of October, in the year 1869, when a woman named Putlibai gave birth to her 4th child, a boy she named Mohandas. Here is a secret about great people. Almost none of them look like great people at the beginning. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born on October 2nd, 1869, in the coastal town of Porbandar, in what is now the state of Gujarat, on the western edge of India. Porbandar means white city, and the name fits. The houses are built of local limestone that catches the light and turns the whole town into something that seems to glow. The Arabian Sea sits at its doorstep, vast and restless and ancient. Gandhi's family belonged to the Baniya caste being the ancient Hindu system that determined what kind of work your family did, whom you could marry, even where you could eat. Baniya families were traditionally traders and merchants, but the Gandhi family had taken a different path. For 3 generations, the Gandhis had served as Diwans. That's a word meaning chief minister, the most important advisor to the ruling prince of a small kingdom. In the patchwork of tiny princely states that made up the region of Kathiawar, a Diwan held enormous responsibility. Gandhi's grandfather, Uttamchand Gandhi, who had served as Diwan of Porbandar, was once forced to flee to a rival state for political reasons. When the new ruler asked him to serve, Uttamchand raised his salute with his left hand, because his right hand, he said, still belonged to Porbandar. In a world where honor meant everything, this small gesture made him legendary. Gandhi's father, Karamchand Gandhi, was a Diwan too. He was a short, stocky man who had barely learned to read. But he had something rarer than book learning. He understood people. He could navigate the treacherous waters between British colonial power and the pride of Indian princes, and he did it with such skill that everyone trusted him. And then there was Gandhi's mother, Putlibai. If you want to understand Mahatma Gandhi, if you want to understand the very center of who he became, you have to understand his mother. Putlibai belonged to a religious community called the Pranami sect, which blended Hindu and Islamic spiritual practices into one. She was a woman of extraordinary, almost supernatural self-discipline. She would not touch food until she had completed her daily prayers. During the 4 months of the rainy season, the time called Chaturmas, she would vow to eat only if she saw the sun. On cloudy days, her children would run outside, searching the gray sky desperately for any break in the clouds. No sun, Mama. And she would smile. She would actually smile and go without food, all day, without a word of complaint. Young Mohandas watched this. He watched his mother deny herself, willingly and peacefully, because she believed it was the right thing to do. And something deep in that boy's soul absorbed the lesson like water into dry earth. But don't get the wrong idea about young Mohandas. He was not a perfect child. He was, by nearly every measure, a perfectly ordinary one, and that is one of the most important things about him. Gandhi's results at the end of secondary school placed him 404th out of all the students who sat the examination in his province. 404th. The record of a boy who was, by the numbers, completely average. He missed classes. He scraped through examinations. He was shy and awkward in crowds, happiest alone or with one trusted friend. His sister remembered him pulling the ears of dogs for amusement, which is not exactly the behavior of a future saint. But then came adolescence, and with it came choices. His best friend was a boy named Sheikh Mehtab. Mehtab was everything Mohandas wasn't. Tall, athletic, physically strong, fearless. And Mehtab had a theory. He believed that Indians were weak because Indians were vegetarians, and the British were powerful because the British ate meat. He even had a verse for it. The mighty Englishman rules the Indians small, because being a meat-eater, he is 5 cubits tall. This made a strange kind of sense to a boy who was small and quiet, and wondered if he would ever be strong. So Mohandas began eating meat in secret. Goat curry, cooked by Mehtab, consumed behind locked doors with the curtains drawn. Each bite tasted like guilt. He imagined his mother's face if she ever found out, the way her eyes would change. He kept eating and kept feeling shame for an entire year. Then the shame won. Mehtab led him to other experiments too, including once a brothel in a narrow alley. The young Gandhi stood frozen with terror in that doorway. The woman inside had no patience for his paralysis. She threw him out. The shame of that moment would follow him for decades. At 13 years old, Mohandas was married. His wife's name was Kasturba, and like him she was 13, also a child, both of them playing at being adults in a game that had enormous consequences. Child marriage was common in India at the time, which does not make it less painful to understand. They were children. They fought. They made up. He was possessive and jealous. She was stubborn and quiet in her resistance. They grew up, imperfectly, together. Then came the night that would haunt Mohandas Gandhi for the rest of his life. His father, Karamchand, was very ill, dying in the way that takes weeks, slowly, painfully, each day a little less of the man still present. Mohandas had been sitting by his bedside, massaging his legs, a son's duty of care. But that night he left his father's side. He went to his pregnant wife's room. Minutes later, a servant came knocking. "Your father has passed." Mohandas Gandhi was not at his father's side when Karamchand Gandhi died. He was with his wife, and Kasturba miscarried weeks later. He blamed himself for both. If animal passion had not blinded me, he would write decades later, I should have been spared the torture of separation from my father during his last moments. That guilt, that burning, lifelong guilt about desire and its cost, would shape every important decision he ever made about his body, his marriage, his spiritual life. He tried college, failed after 5 months. He tried law practice in India. He froze in his first courtroom appearance, literally stood up, opened his mouth, and couldn't speak. He returned his client's fee in shame and went home. By the time he was 22 years old, Mohandas Gandhi had failed at school, failed at college, failed at his first legal job, and was living with his family with no obvious future. Then someone said the words that changed everything. London. Go to London. Become a barrister. That's a lawyer trained in the highest courts of law. With a London qualification, the world might open up. The elders of his caste gathered and told him, "You cannot cross the ocean. To cross the black water is pollution. If you go, you will be excommunicated, cast out of your community, your caste, your family's place in society." Mohandas went anyway. His mother extracted 3 solemn vows before she would give her blessing. No meat, no wine, no women. He swore to all 3. and in September 1888, the 19-year-old, who had never been anywhere, sailed from Bombay into the black Arabian Sea toward a city of 6 million people and a life he could not yet imagine. What was waiting for that boy across the ocean, and would he be ready for it? Can you imagine stepping off a ship and finding yourself in a city of 6 million people when the biggest town you'd ever seen had a few thousand? London in 1888 was the capital of the world's greatest empire, and it was overwhelming in every way. The noise, the fog, the scale of everything. The food, which for a vegetarian who had sworn to eat no meat was an immediate crisis. Early restaurants served nothing but meat. Boarding houses served nothing but meat. The entire city seemed to run on roast beef and mutton, and young Mohandas Gandhi wandered its streets, hungry, homesick, and increasingly desperate. He threw himself into becoming English. Completely, desperately English. He went to Bond Street, London's most fashionable shopping district, and bought expensive suits and a silk top hat. He took lessons in dancing, French, and elocution. He practiced walking with a straight back and speaking without an Indian accent. He was going to become a perfect English gentleman if it killed him. It did not last. The turning point came when Gandhi found a vegetarian restaurant on Farringdon Street and spotted a book in its window, Henry Salt's A Plea for Vegetarianism. This was the moment everything changed. Salt's argument was not just dietary, it was moral. He argued that eating animals was cruel and unnecessary. Gandhi had grown up vegetarian because his family was vegetarian. But reading Salt's book, he became a vegetarian by choice. For the first time, the difference between doing something because you were told to and doing it because you believe it is right, that difference would define the rest of Gandhi's life. The London Vegetarian Society became his first true intellectual community. He started a chapter in his neighborhood. He found his first real English friends, people who read books, debated ideas, cared about justice, and through these friends he discovered something extraordinary. 2 English companions sat down with him and read the Bhagavad Gita together. The Bhagavad Gita, which means Song of the Lord, is one of the most sacred texts in Hinduism. It tells the story of a warrior named Arjuna, who, on the eve of a great battle, cannot bring himself to fight. His divine charioteer, Krishna, speaks to him about duty, about the soul, about what it means to act rightly in the world. And here was Mohandas Gandhi, 20 years old, in London, England, reading his own ancient scripture for the first time because English friends introduced him to it. There is something extraordinary in that image. A young Indian man who had to travel to the opposite end of the earth to discover what his own tradition had always been trying to tell him. The Sermon on the Mount from the Christian Bible hit him like lightning. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the peacemakers. He read the Quran too, with reverence and attention. By the time he left London, he had read the holy books of 3 religions, and found in all of them the same truth, that the highest form of human power is not force, but love. Gandhi's first published writings were not legal briefs. They were a 6-part series for a magazine called The Vegetarian, explaining Indian food and culture to an English audience. He argued that child marriage weakened India, not vegetarianism. A young man writing boldly for an international publication. His first public voice. He qualified as a barrister in June 1891. He was 21 years old. He sailed home to India, and failed immediately. His first court appearance in Bombay, he stood up, opened his mouth, and could not speak. His mind went completely blank. He returned his client's fee and went home to his family in Rajkot, where he made a modest income drafting petitions, chafing at small-town politics, bristling at the casual condescension of British officials. He wanted to leave India again, just for 1 year, just to handle a business case. A wealthy Muslim merchant from his hometown needed a lawyer in a place called South Africa. 1 year. He had absolutely no idea what was waiting for him there. And if he had known, would he have gone anyway? Picture a world sorted by race. Not the way racism quietly operates today, hidden, denied, dressed up in polite language. No, this was racism written into law, carved into public spaces, applied the moment you stepped off a ship. South Africa in 1893 was a society with rules so rigid and so brutal that they had to be printed in official documents just to keep track of them all. The British ran the colonial government. The Boers, Dutch-descended farmers, controlled the countryside. The black African population worked the mines and fields under laws that dictated where they could live, where they could walk, whether they could be on the street after dark. And then there were the Indians, around 50,000 of them in the colony of Natal alone. They had different categories, even among themselves. The workers who'd been brought over on 5-year contracts to cut sugarcane, they were called coolies, a word of contempt, as if their humanity could be measured by the price of their ticket. The traders who'd come on their own, paying their own passage, they were called passenger Indians, as if the money in their pocket was their only credential. In this world, Mahatma Gandhi arrived at age 23 with his first-class train ticket and his English barrister's education, thinking he would handle a business lawsuit and go home in a year. His education began immediately. He walked into a Durban courtroom wearing his turban, the traditional headwear of his community. The magistrate stared. An official muttered, "Remove it." Gandhi kept it on. That evening, he wrote his first letter of protest to an African newspaper. A small act, a small spark. But it was the train that would change everything. He had a first-class ticket from Durban to Pretoria, the colonial capital. First class, paid for, legal. He settled into the compartment with his papers. The train rocked through the South African countryside. At the station of Pietermaritzburg, a white passenger entered, looked at Gandhi, and walked back out. Minutes later, a railway official appeared. "Third class," the official said, gesturing at the door. Gandhi produced his ticket, first class, clearly printed, clearly valid. The official called for a constable. Together they took Gandhi by the arms and deposited him on the platform. His luggage was thrown after him like garbage. The train pulled away into the South African night. Imagine you are there. You are 23 years old. You are standing on a train platform in a city you have never been to before, in a country you barely know. The night air is cold. Cold in a way you didn't expect, because you are from the coast, from the warmth. Your overcoat is in your luggage, but you are too proud to ask for it. You sit in the dark waiting room alone, and the cold seeps through your English suit, through the very fabric of everything you thought you understood about the world. You think about the return ship to India. You have a contract. You could honor it, travel by road, avoid the trains. You could be safe. But that white passenger's face is in your mind, the look of contempt, as if your presence was a contamination, as if a first-class ticket meant nothing because of what you looked like. And something in you, something that has never quite surfaced before, ignites. Something that once lit will never go out. Gandhi sat in that cold waiting room for hours. He made a decision. He would not board the next ship home. The suffering he had endured on that platform, that was the suffering of every Indian in South Africa. Every day. To walk away would be to abandon them. He stayed. The humiliations continued. On the next leg of his journey, by stagecoach, the driver refused to let him sit inside. "Sit on the footboard," he ordered. When Gandhi protested, the man hit him, struck him across the face. Gandhi grabbed the side railing to keep from falling, enduring blow after blow, while white passengers watched in silence and did nothing. Nothing. But then, in the very last stretch of that journey, something unexpected. Another guard tried to move Gandhi to third class, and an English passenger spoke up. He had no objection, he said quietly but firmly, to sharing his compartment with a gentleman. The guard retreated. Gandhi sat down, shaken to his core by both what had just happened and by that single, small, unexpected act of human decency in the middle of all that cruelty. Gandhi later said that the night on the Pietermaritzburg platform was the most important night of his life. He called it the creative experience that gave birth to the whole movement for Indian independence. Every revolution has a moment of ignition. For Gandhi, that moment was a cold train platform, a thrown suitcase, and the long hours of a South African night. He was not going home. But now that he was staying, what exactly was he going to do? Learning how to fight, truly fight, takes years, especially when the kind of fighting you're learning has never existed before. Gandhi spent 12 years in South Africa. He arrived as a lawyer planning to handle one case. He left as something the world had never quite seen, a man who had invented an entirely new kind of weapon, tested it in some of the hardest conditions imaginable, and begun to understand what it could do. But the invention did not come all at once. First came the reading. The years in South Africa were years of voracious, transformative reading. Gandhi read the Bhagavad Gita the way other people eat, daily, with desperate hunger. He read Leo Tolstoy's The Kingdom of God is Within You, and the great Russian novelist's argument that true Christianity meant radical nonviolence shook Gandhi to his foundations. He read John Ruskin's Unto This Last, a fierce attack on the idea that wealth and accumulation were the purpose of civilization. These 3 books rewired him. Slowly, over years, the well-dressed lawyer from Porbandar began to understand something. The entire structure of modern civilization, with its armies, its factories, its empires, its hunger for money and power, was built on a foundation of violence. And if the foundation is violent, nothing built on top of it can be truly just. But what could you build instead? He began experimenting. He founded a community called Phoenix Settlement outside Durban, a place where lawyers and laborers lived and worked together, grew their own food, printed their own newspaper, and treated each other as equals. No servants, no hierarchy, just people trying to live according to their principles. He made another vow, too, one that seems very unusual, especially for a young audience, so let me explain it carefully. Gandhi took a vow of brahmacharya, a Sanskrit word meaning celibacy, which means no sexual relations. Now, why would a married man choose this? Because Gandhi had come to believe that there was a kind of energy inside every human being, a deep spiritual and physical energy. And he believed you had a choice about where to direct it. You could direct it toward desire, toward comfort, toward the pleasures of life, or you could redirect it entirely toward your purpose, toward serving others, toward truth. He believed that perfect self-discipline would create a kind of moral power, an inner force that nothing external could break. He was in some ways right. Then came the Transvaal Registration Act of 1906. The government of the Transvaal, one of the Boer-run states of South Africa, passed a law requiring every Indian to register their fingerprints like a criminal, to carry a pass at all times, to submit to inspection, to be treated, legally and formally, like a suspect. Gandhi was furious. But not the kind of furious that punches, the kind of furious that thinks. He organized a meeting. Empire Theatre, Johannesburg, September 11th, 1906. 3,000 people packed into that hall. Can you feel the electricity in a room of 3,000 angry people? When the air is hot and the voices are already raised and everyone is waiting for someone to say what needs to be said, Gandhi stood up, and instead of telling them what they wanted to hear, that they would fight, that they would resist, that the government would regret this, he told them the truth, the full, unflinching truth. He warned them. He told them exactly what would happen if they defied this law. The government would take their businesses, their homes. They would go to prison, not for days, but for months. Their families would struggle. Their children would cry for them at night. Their wives and husbands would face hardship alone. Was this, he asked, really what they wanted? Because once they raised their hands and took this oath, there was no going back. And then he asked, who was willing? Every single person in that theater rose to their feet. 3,000 people, hands raised, voices joined, one sound. What do you call that? What is the name for a force like that? Gandhi needed a name. Passive resistance, the English term, was too weak, too passive. What had happened in that theater was not passive. It was the most active thing Gandhi had ever witnessed, people consciously choosing suffering over submission. He held a competition. He asked the readers of his newspaper to suggest a name. A cousin submitted 2 words in Sanskrit. Gandhi combined them into one. Satyagraha. Satya means truth. Agraha means holding firmly to something, grasping it, insisting on it, refusing to let go. Put them together and you get truth force, soul force. Now a 10-year-old deserves a real explanation of this, because it is one of the most important ideas any human being has ever had. Satyagraha is not the weapon of the weak. This is what Gandhi insisted, and he was right. It takes no courage whatsoever to run from a fight. It takes no courage to simply give in. Satyagraha requires something far harder than fighting back. It requires the strength to absorb suffering without letting it turn you into the thing you are fighting against. It requires the iron discipline to say, "You can hurt my body, you can take my property, you can put me in prison, but you cannot make me hate you. You cannot make me become violent, because the moment I become violent, I have lost, not the fight, but myself." The power behind satyagraha is this: it forces the oppressor to reveal themselves. If you resist with violence, your oppressor can call you dangerous and justify their cruelty. But if you resist without violence, if you absorb blow after blow and refuse to strike back, then the world watches the oppressor, not you. The world sees what they really are. The 7-year campaign in South Africa tested this idea to its absolute limits. Indians went to jail, hundreds of them. Gandhi himself was arrested and imprisoned for the first time in January 1908. He later recalled that prison suited him strangely. He read, he thought, he wrote, he spun cotton. He was entirely himself. Compromises were reached, then broken. The government promised to repeal the law if Indians registered voluntarily. Gandhi agreed. He went to register to show good faith, and a Pathan man named Mir Alam, who believed Gandhi was betraying the movement, beat him nearly to death on a Johannesburg street. Gandhi, bleeding, refused to name his attacker. Satyagraha means absorbing blows from all sides. The struggle continued. In 1913, 2 events lit a fire that could not be put out. First, the government refused to abolish the £3 tax, £3 per year, that fell on every Indian worker who stayed in South Africa as a free laborer after their contract ended. For men earning pennies, this was a choice between feeding their children and paying the government. Then came the second blow. A court ruling declared that only Christian marriages were legally valid. Hindu and Muslim marriages, which meant the vast majority of Indian marriages, were declared void. Wives became, in the eyes of the law, concubines. Children became illegitimate. And that is when Kasturba Gandhi stepped forward. For years, she had maintained the home while her husband fought his battles. But this attack on the sanctity of marriage was an attack on her and every woman like her. She would go to prison. In September 1913, Kasturba led 16 satyagrahis, truth soldiers, from Phoenix settlement across the border into the Transvaal. They knew what waited. Each was sentenced to 3 months hard labor. The sight of Kasturba Gandhi and other Indian women being marched off to prison had an electrifying effect on the Indian community of South Africa. If the women could endure prison, what excuse did the men have? Within days, workers in the coal mines and sugar plantations began laying down their tools. Hundreds, then thousands. The Great March began on November 6, 1913, from the town of Charlestown. More than 2,000 men, women, and children walked together, crossing the border, daring the government to arrest them all. Gandhi was arrested, released on bail, rejoined the march, arrested again. The government loaded marchers onto trains like cargo and sent them back to their mines, which had been turned into open-air prisons, surrounded by barbed wire, workers forced back to work at gunpoint. The Viceroy of India, the British representative ruling the entire Indian subcontinent, publicly condemned a British colonial government for its treatment of Indian workers. The empire was cracking along its own seams. The Indian Relief Bill of 1914 abolished the £3 tax and recognized Hindu and Muslim marriages as legally valid. 21 years after arriving for a 1-year contract, Gandhi boarded a ship to leave South Africa. He was no longer a lawyer. He was something new, a man who had forged a weapon that empires could not stop, and he was carrying it home. But home had changed, and so had he. Would India be ready for what he was bringing? The ship pulled into Bombay harbor on a January morning in 1915, and the city roared. Thousands had gathered since before dawn. When Gandhi and Kasturba appeared at the top of the gangway, the cheering swelled into something almost physical. Garlands of marigolds and roses flying through the air, petals raining down, the sheer force of all that human affection pressing forward from every direction. India had heard what had happened in South Africa, and India was ready to worship this man. Gandhi was uncomfortable with worship. He was also uncomfortable with how little he knew about his own country. He had left India 20 years before as a young lawyer. India had changed. The independence movement had grown. A dozen political organizations and a dozen competing visions of India's future were all fighting for the same space. And Gandhi, the hero of South Africa, barely understood any of it. His political mentor, a wise man named Gopal Krishna Gokhale, gave him specific advice: travel for a year, watch, listen, don't speak yet, learn. So Gandhi packed light and bought third-class train tickets. Not first class, not even second. Third class, the cramped, crowded, often filthy compartments where the poorest people rode. He wanted to know India as the poorest Indian knew it, pressed shoulder to shoulder with laborers and farmers, smelling the dust and the sweat, and the India that the colonial rulers never saw from their first-class carriages. In Madras, the crowds were so enormous and so enthusiastic that men unhitched the horses from his carriage and pulled it themselves through the streets, their bare feet slapping against the dust, their backs bent, their faces shining. But it was in the villages that Gandhi found the thing that shook him most: untouchability. In the ancient Hindu caste system, there existed, below every caste, outside every category, a group of people whom the system declared impure, untouchable. These people were assigned the most degrading work: cleaning sewers, removing dead animals, tanning leather, and the society surrounding them responded to that assignment with a cruelty that is almost impossible to comprehend. These people could not enter temples, could not use the same wells, could not let their shadows fall across an upper caste path, could not be touched, could barely be seen. Gandhi witnessed this, watched it with his own eyes, in village after village across India. "If it is proved to me," he declared publicly, "that untouchability is an essential part of Hinduism, I for one would declare myself an open rebel against Hinduism itself." He was beginning to understand what the real work in India would be. Then, at the Indian National Congress session in Lucknow in 1916, a small, persistent, desperate man appeared at Gandhi's elbow. His name was Rajkumar Shukla, and he was a peasant farmer from the Bihar countryside. He was not important. He was not educated. He was not powerful. He was simply relentless. He followed Gandhi from Lucknow to his next destination, then the destination after that, then all the way to Gandhi's ashram in Ahmedabad. Day after day, week after week, the same plea: come to Champaran, come and see what they are doing to us. Gandhi finally agreed. What was happening in Champaran? And what would Gandhi find there that would prove something the world had never quite believed before? The Tinathia system, that's what they called it. Tin means 3. Athia means a portion. And the system worked like this. British indigo planters, men who had come to Bihar to grow the blue dye used in European cloth, forced every farmer on their land to grow indigo on 3/20ths of his field. Not because the farmer chose to, not because it made economic sense for the farmer, but because the planter said so, because the planter was British, because the alternative was violence. The compensation was pitiful. The indigo that colored the coats of European gentlemen was paid for in Indian suffering. Gandhi arrived in Champaran, Bihar in April 1917. He was 47 years old, and this was his first major campaign on Indian soil. He began methodically, in the way of a barrister. He started recording testimonies. He traveled from village to village on the back of an elephant, swaying through the Bihar countryside, while farmers told him their stories. The British authorities watched and grew nervous. An order arrived: leave the district immediately. Gandhi received the order, read it, considered it, and went to court. He stood before a magistrate and read a statement that would echo across India. He said he had come to render humanitarian and national service. He now faced 2 duties, pulling in opposite directions: obey the law or obey his conscience, and serve the oppressed peasants of Bihar. He chose his conscience. He pleaded guilty, and then he waited. Outside the courthouse, thousands of farmers, men who had walked miles through the Bihar heat, to be near this stranger who had come to hear their stories, waited with him. The countryside was watching. The empire was watching. The government withdrew the case. An inquiry committee was formed. Gandhi sat on it. Farmer after farmer after farmer told their story. The evidence piled up like indigo leaves at harvest time. The committee's recommendation was unanimous: abolish the Tinathia system. The British planters fought it, but the verdict stood. Among the young lawyers who worked with Gandhi in Champaran was a man named Rajendra Prasad, who would go on to become the first president of independent India. Great movements create great people. This was the proof Gandhi had been waiting for. Satyagraha worked on Indian soil. The weapon forged in South Africa could be used here. The lawyer who had returned home as a curiosity was becoming something that the British Raj had never quite faced before. Then came 1919, and something happened that would change everything, for Gandhi, for India, for the entire relationship between a people and their empire. What could possibly be worse than what had happened in Champaran? Sadly, the answer is much, much worse. To understand what happened on April 13th, 1919, you have to understand the place. Jallianwala Bagh is a public garden in the city of Amritsar, in the Punjab region of northern India. It is surrounded on nearly all sides by high walls, with only a few narrow entrances, more like lanes than gateways. On April 13th, the festival of Baisakhi was being celebrated, a joyful spring harvest festival. Families had come from surrounding villages, men, women, children, elderly people. Thousands of them gathered in the sunshine, celebrating the season. General Reginald Dyer arrived with 90 soldiers and 2 armored cars. The armored cars couldn't fit through the narrow entrances. The soldiers could. Dyer deployed his men at the entrances. He gave no warning. He gave no order to disperse. He did not ask anyone to leave. He gave the order to fire directly into the crowd. For 10 minutes, rifles cracked into that enclosed garden. The crowd had nowhere to run. The exits were blocked by soldiers. People climbed walls and fell. People threw themselves flat on the ground. Many jumped into the only well in the garden, trying to escape the bullets. They had to drain that well afterward. The official British count was 380 dead. Historians estimate it was likely more than 1,000, 1,500 wounded. It is important to pause here, because this moment, this terrible, inexcusable, deliberate slaughter of unarmed civilians celebrating a holiday, this moment cracked something open in the conscience of India. The British Empire had always presented itself as a civilizing force, as a benevolent administrator, as the bearer of order and law and justice to a disordered world. On April 13th, 1919, in the Jallianwala Bagh, the empire showed what it really was. Gandhi's response surprised everyone, including his closest supporters. He did not call for revenge. He did not call for violence. He called off his existing protest movement entirely. Not because the massacre had scared him, but because some Indians had responded to the crisis with violence of their own, and Gandhi refused to lead a movement he could not hold to non-violent discipline. Think about that for a moment. He was winning. He was building. And he stopped because his own side had broken the rules he believed in. This too was satyagraha, the discipline to call off your own victory when it begins to become something you don't believe in. He announced, everything would be done differently from here. The Indian National Congress, non-cooperation, a new phase, a new scale. The British Empire had shown its face, and Gandhi was about to show India its own. In 1920, Gandhi proposed something so ambitious, so radical, so enormous in scale, that even his closest supporters thought it was impossible. All of India, simultaneously, refusing to cooperate. Not fighting, not marching, not rioting, just refusing, withdrawing, stepping back from the entire machinery of British rule and saying, we will not participate. Lawyers would not appear in British courts. Students would walk out of British schools. Government officials would resign their positions. Merchants would boycott British goods. The whole intricate system by which Britain ruled 300 million people, a system that depended on Indians cooperating, Indians working within it, Indians accepting it, would simply be withdrawn. The British government ran India with a remarkably small number of British people. The system only worked because millions of Indians worked within it every day. Gandhi was asking them to stop. And then he gave India a symbol. The charkha, the spinning wheel. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? A wooden wheel, a spindle, a length of cotton thread. Something your great-great-grandmother might have used in a village kitchen 300 years ago. But Gandhi declared it the patriotic duty of every Indian to spin 200 yards of cotton thread every day, to wear khadi, rough homespun cloth, instead of the polished machine-made cloth imported from the mills of Manchester and Liverpool, to buy Indian, to make Indian, to be Indian. Gandhi believed that Britain's economic power over India was based on India's dependence on British manufactured goods, especially cloth. The mills of Manchester and Liverpool had destroyed India's ancient tradition of hand-weaving. and made the subcontinent dependent on foreign fabric. Every meter of khadi that an Indian spun for themselves was a meter of economic independence. When Gandhi wore his simple white dhoti, that cloth he spun himself, he was making an economic argument, and a moral argument, and a political argument all at once. Across India, bonfires were lit, bonfires of imported British cloth, cotton from Manchester, silk from Liverpool, going up in flames in town squares from Gujarat to Bengal to the Punjab. The spinning wheel became a symbol of dignity, of self-reliance, of the quiet pride of a people refusing to be told what to wear. The movement grew to an extraordinary size. It was the most organized, most widespread campaign of nonviolent resistance the world had yet seen. And then, on February 4th, 1922, in a small town called Chauri Chora in the United Provinces, a mob of 3,000 people, faced with police provocation, locked 22 policemen inside their station and burned it to the ground with them inside. 22 men died. Gandhi heard the news, and he called off the entire non-cooperation movement. His closest allies were furious. Jawaharlal Nehru, Gandhi's most brilliant and devoted political follower, wrote from prison that he felt as though the ground had been cut out from under him. The British press laughed. Cartoonists drew Gandhi as a figure of ridicule. Newspapers mocked his inconsistency. Gandhi was unmoved. He would not lead a revolution built on the corpses of 22 policemen. No matter how unjust the system, no matter how much ground had been gained, the moment your movement kills people, it has become the thing you were fighting. He was arrested. He stood trial. He pleaded guilty and turned the courtroom into an arena of moral authority, explaining calmly and without apology what he had done and why, so clearly and so honestly that the judge, before sentencing him to 6 years in prison, said it was a privilege and a pleasure to do so. Gandhi spent his years in prison, reading, writing, and always spinning cotton. He believed that no hour was wasted if you used it well. 6 years in prison was for Gandhi 6 years of preparation for what came next. Was Gandhi's discipline a weapon of genius, or did it always hand victory back to the oppressor? That question had not yet been answered, but it was about to be. March 12, 1930. Gandhi is 61 years old. His body has been through years of imprisonment, years of fasting, years of illness. He is thin and small and bespectacled, and he has no teeth. He looks, in many photographs from this period, like someone's grandfather who has survived a great deal and is still somehow standing. He announced that his next act of defiance would be about salt. His own closest allies were skeptical. Jawaharlal Nehru, brilliant, sophisticated, educated at Harrow and Cambridge, privately called the idea quixotic, a word meaning charmingly impractical. Sarojini Naidu, one of India's greatest poets and a formidable figure in the independence movement, mocked it quietly. The British officials, when they heard the plan, literally laughed. "Let the old man walk to the ocean," they said. "Let him pick up some salt. Let him tire himself out. He can't possibly think this will matter." They did not understand what Gandhi understood. The salt tax was not primarily about money. It was about power. The British had made it illegal for Indians to produce or possess salt, the mineral that every living body needs, without paying a tax to the empire. Every person in India, no matter how poor, no matter how far from any market, used salt, and every grain of it was taxed. The poorest woman in the remotest village paid the British Empire for the right to flavor her food. Gandhi saw it clearly. Salt was the perfect symbol, something that touched every Indian life, something ancient, necessary, dignified, something the earth provided freely and the empire taxed unfairly. To pick up salt from the ground was to say, "This earth is ours, not theirs." The march began at Sabarmati Ashram, Gandhi's home outside Ahmedabad. 78 chosen volunteers, representing different regions, different castes, different religions, all people of established character and commitment, would walk with him. Imagine you are there. It is March 12th, 1930. Dawn is breaking over the Sabarmati River. The ashram is quiet. You can smell the cool morning air and the river water and the wood smoke from the kitchen fires. 78 people are lined up in the early light. Gandhi stands at the front, his bamboo walking staff in his hand, his simple white dhoti barely stirring in the morning breeze. He is not dramatic. He is not performing. He simply says a prayer. And then he walks. The first day, The road is familiar. People from the ashram see him off. The second day, word has spread. Villagers line the route. By the third day, people have come from miles around to touch his feet or to watch him pass. By the fourth day, the road is crowded for miles. Something extraordinary happens at every village Gandhi enters. The village headman, the local government official, who holds his position because the British appointed him, meets Gandhi at the edge of the village and then takes off his official turban and throws it into the crowd and resigns. Because if Gandhi is walking past, a person cannot stand on the side of the oppressor. Not anymore. Each evening Gandhi speaks to whoever has gathered, not just about salt, about dignity, about the right of people to the resources of their own land, about untouchability. He never passes an opportunity to challenge caste discrimination, about Hindu-Muslim unity. The march is, as one observer wrote, a moving university. The route was exactly 241 miles, carefully chosen to pass through specific villages, to build momentum, to allow news to travel ahead of the marchers. Gandhi calculated every step. The march took 24 days. Every day, the crowd following Gandhi grew larger. April 6, 1930, dawn at Dandi Beach. We are back where we started. Gandhi bends down. He picks up the salt-crusted mud. Sarojini Naidu, the woman who had mocked this plan, stands watching, and she cries out, her voice breaking with something she hadn't expected to feel. Hail, lawbreaker! Within days, the entire country is making salt, boiling seawater in courtyards, picking up salt from beaches and riverbanks. Women, whom Gandhi had initially asked to stay home, poured into the streets in numbers that stunned everyone, even Gandhi himself. They picketed liquor shops. They stood in front of stores selling British cloth. Jails began to fill. Hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands of people arrested for the simple act of making salt. Then came Darsana. At the Darsana Salt Works, north of Bombay, a woman named Sarojini Naidu led 2,500 volunteers in a non-violent raid. They walked forward in silence toward the salt depot. Police waited with steel-tipped lathis, heavy wooden clubs reinforced with iron. And an American journalist named Webb Miller watched what happened next. The volunteers walked forward. The clubs swung. The volunteers fell. More walked forward. The clubs swung again. Miller watched men's skulls being fractured, saw bodies fall unconscious into the dust, saw blood pooling in the Indian earth. Not one of those volunteers raised a hand in defense. Not one stepped out of line. Miller cabled his report to newspapers around the world. He described the most brutal example of police force he had ever witnessed. He described the sickening sound of clubs on unprotected skulls. The report appeared in newspapers from London to New York to Tokyo. The British Empire had revealed itself, not as a civilization, not as a benevolent administrator, as an occupier that would club unarmed human beings for picking up salt from a beach. The moral foundation of British rule in India did not crumble slowly after that. It collapsed. The British, under enormous international pressure, agreed to negotiate. The man they had called a half-naked fakir was invited to London to discuss the future of India, and how this man arrived in London was something nobody would ever forget. Picture the most powerful empire the world had ever seen, its gleaming capital city, its gold and marble and ceremony and ancient stone, and walking through all of it, a small, thin, bespectacled man in a white loincloth and sandals. That was Mahatma Gandhi in London, 1931. He came as the sole representative of the Indian National Congress, the sole spokesperson for 300 million people, for the Second Round Table Conference, a series of political meetings aimed at discussing India's future. He was, by any measure, one of the most important people in London that autumn. The authorities offered him a suite at the Ritz, one of the most luxurious hotels in the world. He turned it down flat. Instead, he made his way to Kingsley Hall, a community centre in London's East End, run by a Quaker woman named Muriel Lester. The East End was where London's poor lived, packed into tenement buildings that smelled of coal smoke and cabbage and the damp that never quite left old cities. The air was grey. The streets were narrow. Children played in the gutters. This was exactly where Gandhi wanted to be. His daily routine became the talk of London. He rose at 4 in the morning for prayers. Then he walked through the quiet streets while the city still slept. the same streets that would fill in a few hours with the roar of London at work. Milkmen would wave. Newspaper boys would call out greetings. Within days, crowds of neighborhood children began following him through the back alleys, and he would joke with them, his toothless grin and bright eyes, winning them over completely. He visited the textile workers of Lancashire, the men and women whose livelihoods had been damaged by India's boycott of British cloth. He expected anger. He found curiosity instead. He explained, simply and honestly, that his goal was not to harm them. It was to feed the millions in India who had nothing. The workers listened. Many shook his hand. Gandhi met Charlie Chaplin during his London visit, though he had never heard of him. He also met George Bernard Shaw, one of the greatest writers of the age. Shaw emerged from their meeting and told waiting reporters that he had just met the second greatest man in the world. When a reporter asked who the first greatest was, Shaw smiled and said nothing. He visited King George V at Buckingham Palace. He wore his usual dhoti, his sandals, nothing else. A reporter asked him afterward whether he had felt underdressed for the occasion. Gandhi's reply was immediate. The king had on enough for both of us. But the political conference was a disaster. The fiercest battle came not with the British, but with Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, one of the most extraordinary human beings of the 20th century, and a man Gandhi needed to understand far better than he did. Ambedkar had been born into the lowest level of the Hindu caste system. An untouchable, a Dalit, in the language Gandhi was beginning to use. He had clawed his way through a system that tried to destroy him at every turn, to a doctorate from Columbia University in New York, a law degree from London, and a level of intellectual achievement that made him one of the most formidable minds in India. He had paid for every credential with indescribable personal suffering, barred from schools, thrown from bullock carts, forbidden from drinking at public wells, humiliated in 100 ways large and small, simply because of the family he had been born into. And Ambedkar's demand was clear: separate electoral seats for Dalits, their own representatives, their own political power. Because without separate representation, he argued, the Dalit population, the most oppressed group in India, would forever remain crushed beneath the heel of the caste majority. Gandhi refused. Separate electorates, he insisted, would permanently divide Hindu society along caste lines and make healing impossible. Two men, both fighting for justice, both right in their own way, neither willing to yield. The conference ended in complete deadlock. Gandhi sailed home without a political settlement. And back in India, the Ambedkar question was about to force Gandhi into the most desperate, most controversial, and most powerful fast of his life. When a man is willing to die for his beliefs, is that courage or is it coercion? India was about to grapple with that question in the most intimate possible way. Yaravda prison, Pune. Gandhi is in his cell when the document arrives. The British Prime Minister, Ramsay MacDonald, has granted Ambedkar's demand: separate electorates for the depressed classes, for the Dalits of India. Gandhi reads it, and writes one of the most alarming letters of his life. Unless this decision is reversed, he writes, he will fast until he dies. The nation went still. Let's be honest about what was happening here, because both men were right, and both men were fighting, and the complexity deserves to be honored. Ambedkar had spent his entire life fighting a system that had tried, at every turn, to make him feel like less than a human being. He had earned every credential despite that system. He understood from lived personal experience that without political power, real power, guaranteed power, not power that could be voted away by the majority, his people would remain vulnerable forever. Separate electorates were not about division, they were about survival. Gandhi's argument was different and also real. If you permanently separate Indian society into separate political communities, Hindus here, Muslims there, Dalits somewhere else, you make permanent the very divisions that need to heal. You build walls instead of bridges. You make it impossible for India to become one. One crisis. As Gandhi weakened, his pulse dropping, his kidneys beginning to fail, the days without food accumulating, something extraordinary began happening across India that had never happened before. Temple doors that had been barred to Dalits for centuries swung open. In Bombay, upper caste Brahmins shared water from public wells with untouchables, an act so radical that bystanders wept. In the holy city of Varanasi, scenes unfolded that would have been literally unthinkable a month earlier. The fast was doing something that years of argument and petition had not done. It was forcing India to look at itself. The pressure on Ambedkar was crushing. Every hour brought delegations, telegrams, appeals. Please save the Mahatma. He faced an impossible choice. Hold firm for the political rights his people desperately needed and be blamed if Gandhi died. Or compromise and lose what he had fought so hard to win. He traveled to Gandhi's bedside at Yeravda prison. The negotiations were, by all accounts, brutal. Ambedkar and his colleagues fought for every detail, nothing given easily, no ground surrendered without a fight. At Gandhi's bedside, Ambedkar said plainly, "I want political power for my community. That is indispensable for our survival." Gandhi's response, weakened, barely audible, was both moving and deeply controversial. "You are born an untouchable, but I am an untouchable by adoption, and as a new convert, I feel more for the welfare of the community than those already within it." Ambedkar later would say what many Dalits have said since: a person born into privilege cannot claim to feel more for the oppressed than the oppressed themselves. The debate is not settled, it never will be. But a compromise was reached. The Pune Pact, signed on September 24, 1932, not separate electorates, but dramatically increased reserved seats. 148 seats instead of the 71 the British had originally offered. Rabindranath Tagore, India's greatest poet and the man who had given Gandhi the title Mahatma, arrived to sing from his Gitanjali, his collection of devotional songs, as Gandhi drank orange juice and broke his fast. Gandhi launched a new weekly newspaper. He named it Harijan, Children of God, his new name for people the world had called untouchable. Orthodox Hindus threw black flags at him in some towns. In others, they threw feces. In Pune, in June 1934, someone tried to kill him. A bomb exploded near his car. He kept walking. The Pune Pact is still debated vigorously in India today. Many Dalit scholars argue that Gandhi's fast was a form of moral coercion, using his own life as a weapon to force Ambedkar to accept a deal that gave Dalits more seats but removed their independent political power. Others argue that Gandhi genuinely believed he was protecting India's unity. The truth, as always, is more complicated than either side wants to admit. Both men changed India. Neither one could have done it without the other. But the greatest tests were still coming. From a war in Europe, from a prison in Pune, and from the woman who had stood beside Gandhi through everything, and whose death would break something in him that never fully healed. September 1939, Britain declared war on Germany, and in the same breath, without a single conversation with any Indian leader, without even a courtesy notice, the Viceroy of India, Lord Linlithgow, committed 400 million Indians to fight Britain's war. 400 million people, no vote, no consent, no discussion. Gandhi's response to Hitler was one of the most extraordinary and controversial positions of his life. He wrote to Hitler twice, appealing to him not as a politician, but as a human being. He asked whether there was not something in Hitler's own soul that recoiled at the suffering he was causing. The letters were intercepted. Hitler, unsurprisingly, did not respond. Gandhi did not waver from non-violence, even against the Nazis. This position horrified many people, including many of Gandhi's own supporters, and it remains deeply controversial. How can you resist a force as purely evil as Nazism without fighting back with equal force? It is a question that does not have a simple answer. Gandhi's answer was that violence always creates more violence, even when the violence is righteous. Many people disagree with him. They have good reasons. But India's immediate crisis was not Germany, it was Britain. On August 8, 1942, at a massive session of the Indian National Congress in Bombay, Gandhi gave the speech of his life. Do or die.
Those were his words. In Hindi, Karo ya maro.
He said, "We shall either free India or die in the attempt. We shall not live to see the perpetuation of our slavery." He was careful, absolutely specific, that this was a call to nonviolent resistance, not to fighting, not to terrorism, to unyielding, uncompromising, unflinching refusal. The Quit India resolution passed that night. Gandhi planned to write to the Viceroy in the morning to explain what would follow. The British didn't wait for the morning. At 4 a.m. on August 9th, Police arrived at homes across India. Gandhi was arrested. Nehru was arrested. Every major Congress leader was arrested. Tens of thousands of people swept into custody in a single night. And then something happened that Gandhi had not planned for. India rose without its leaders. Bridges blown, telegraph lines cut, police stations attacked, a rebellion so widespread and so spontaneous that the British found themselves unable to arrest their way out of it. Gandhi, locked in his prison cell, could not control it, could not guide it, could not keep it non-violent. He fasted in prison in protest at the violence being done in his name. And then came the blow that broke him more completely than any British prison ever had. February 22nd, 1944. Kasturba Gandhi was ill. She had been ill for months in Aga Khan Palace in Pune, where she and Gandhi were being held. She had a persistent cough, then bronchitis, then a series of small strokes. She was 80 years old. Gandhi sat beside her. He held her in his arms. He prayed. He spun cotton. She died there in prison on February 22nd, 1944, in his arms. They had been married for 62 years. Let me tell you something about Kasturba Gandhi, because she deserves more than a footnote in any story that claims to tell the truth. She was not a supporting character in Gandhi's story. She was a full human being who made her own choices, choices that sometimes agreed with Gandhi's and sometimes absolutely did not. She had argued with him. She had refused to clean latrines, a duty he assigned to everyone at the ashram, regardless of caste, and she had not backed down easily. She had endured his experiments and his vows and his public life with a quiet stubbornness that was its own form of iron. When the moment came to go to prison herself in South Africa in 1913, she went, not because Gandhi told her to, but because she decided. She was the person who knew Gandhi most completely, who had seen every face he showed the world and the faces he showed no one else. And she was gone. The British released Gandhi from prison months later, thin and grieving, into an India that was hurtling towards something he had always dreaded. Independence was coming, but it was coming in a shape that was going to break the old man's heart. The Great Calcutta Killing, August 1946. In 4 days, thousands of people were killed as Hindu and Muslim communities turned on each other in the streets of what had once been called the City of Joy. The mathematics were simple and obscene. They killed our people, so we will kill theirs. The violence spread to Noakhali in East Bengal, where Hindu homes were burned, women were taken, men were given the choice to convert or die. Then to Bihar, where Hindu mobs killed thousands of Muslims in retaliation. Retaliation for retaliation, blood calling for blood, the logic of vengeance, ancient and merciless. Gandhi walked directly into Noakhali. He was 77 years old, barefoot, crossing flooded fields where hostile crowds sometimes gathered at his prayer meetings. Sometimes people threw broken glass on the paths where they knew he would walk in the morning, glass specifically placed for his bare feet. He kept walking. For 43 days, Gandhi lived in a bamboo hut in Noakhali, walls of woven grass, floor of packed earth. Each morning before dawn he walked barefoot to the next village, reading from the Bhagavad Gita and the Quran in the same calm, reverent voice, alternating between the two holy books as if they were two verses of the same prayer. The terrified Hindu families found courage in his presence. Many Muslims, watching this ancient man walk deliberately toward hostility, felt something they hadn't expected. Shame. Then came Bihar, where the violence had gone the other way. Gandhi arrived to find burned mosques standing like broken teeth against the sky. He visited refugee camps. He ordered wells excavated, and from one well the bodies of murdered Muslims were retrieved. Evidence that officials had tried to bury. At his prayer meetings in Bihar, his voice usually so gentle, he carried an edge of steel that no one who heard it ever forgot. Bihar has sullied the fair name of India. In August 1947, as Independence Day approached, Gandhi returned to Calcutta, the most violent city in India. He chose to live not in a government house, not with wealthy supporters, but in a derelict Muslim-owned house in one of the worst affected neighborhoods. And he brought with him, as his guest, Hussein Shahid Surawardi, the Muslim League leader whom many Hindus blamed personally for the previous year's riots. Lord Mountbatten, the last Viceroy of India, wrote a famous letter to Gandhi in August 1947, comparing the situation in Punjab, where 55,000 British soldiers were struggling to contain massive communal violence, with the situation in Bengal, where Gandhi alone, without any military force, had quieted a city. In the Punjab, Mountbatten wrote, "We have 55,000 soldiers and large-scale rioting on our hands. In Bengal, our force consists of one man, and there is no rioting." Gandhi had become what Mountbatten called a one-man boundary force. But even as Bengal held its breath, the news from Delhi was catastrophic. The capital of the new nation of India was drowning in blood. Hindu and Sikh refugees driven from Pakistan were turning their rage on Delhi's Muslim population. Tens of thousands of Muslims were driven from their homes and crammed into the courtyards of ancient monuments. Humayun's tomb, the Purana Qila, structures built by Muslim emperors centuries before, now sheltering their terrified descendants. And somewhere in the weeks before Independence Day, in rooms in Delhi where decisions were being made, Gandhi's closest friends and political allies, Jawaharlal Nehru, Vallabhbhai Patel, agreed to the partition of India into two nations, India and Pakistan. Gandhi had once said, "India will be divided only over my dead body." He still breathed, and the line was drawn. On August 15, 1947, the night of Indian independence, a night of fireworks and joy, and Nehru's famous Tryst with Destiny speech, India celebrated in the streets. Gandhi was not in Delhi. He was in Calcutta, alone, fasting, mourning the vivisection, his word, the cutting apart, of a country he had spent his entire adult life trying to keep whole. He had spent 30 years fighting for Indian independence, and he was spending Independence Day in grief. He had 5 months left to live. September 1947. Gandhi arrives in the capital to find a city that is killing itself. Muslim families huddled in refugee camps inside ancient monuments. Mosques being desecrated, occupied, looted. Hindu and Sikh refugees from Pakistan filling the streets, raw with grief and rage. He takes up residence at Birla House, the home of a wealthy industrialist, one of his longtime supporters. Every evening he holds prayer meetings in the garden. The city smolders around him, and this 78-year-old man speaks into the gathering darkness about the futility of revenge. Retaliation is no remedy, he tells the crowds. Attacking innocent Muslims in Delhi will not bring back the dead of Punjab. It will only create more dead. There are people in India at this moment who hate Gandhi, not because he is wrong, but because his compassion for Muslims feels to them like betrayal. The Hindu Mahasabha, the RSS, organizations that believe India belongs to Hindus, and that Gandhi's insistence that Muslims and Christians deserve equal rights is dangerous, foolish, treacherous. Someone says out loud that Gandhi must be silenced. On January 13, 1948, 13 days before his death, Gandhi announces an indefinite fast, no time limit, no safety net. He will not eat until he is satisfied that genuine peace has come to Delhi. He will not eat until the killing stops. He is 78 years old. He is old and tired, and his body has been tested beyond what most bodies could survive. And he says, "I will not eat while my brothers are killing each other." The fast works with stunning speed. Community leaders come to his bedside, leaders from Hindu extremist organizations, from Muslim groups, from Sikh organizations, and sign a peace pledge. Delhi begins, painfully, to breathe again. On January 18th, after 5 days without food, Gandhi breaks his fast. But not everyone is moved. On January 20th, a bomb is thrown at his evening prayer meeting in the Birla House garden. It explodes harmlessly. Gandhi refuses to increase his security. He will not have armed guards at a prayer meeting. Imagine you are there. It is January 30th, 1948, 5:10 in the evening. The garden at Birla House is filling with people for the daily prayer meeting. The winter sun is already low, painting the garden in shades of gold and copper. The air is cool and still. Gandhi is slightly late. He walks from the house toward the prayer ground, supported on each side by a young woman, his grandnieces Abba and Manu, who have been caring for him through the exhausting weeks of fasting and grief. He is thin. He is small. He leans on them as he walks, and he is smiling at the people gathering in the garden, smiling in the way of someone who is at peace with his own tiredness. The crowd parts to let him through. A man steps forward from the gathering. His name is Nathuram Godse. He is 37 years old, from Pune, a journalist and Hindu nationalist who has been part of a conspiracy, a group of men who believe that Gandhi has betrayed the Hindu nation by defending Muslims, that Gandhi is the reason India was divided, that Gandhi must be stopped. Gandhi steps forward from the crowd. He bows before Gandhi. He pulls a pistol from his pocket. He fires 3 times. Point-blank range. Gandhi falls. The people around him do not understand for a moment what has happened. Then they do. Gandhi's hands, which had risen in the namaste, the gesture of greeting, remain raised. His lips move. Hey Ram! Oh God! He died within minutes. That night, Jawaharlal Nehru, the man Gandhi had mentored, the man who would lead independent India, the man who had stood beside Gandhi through decades of struggle, went on All India Radio. His voice broke as he spoke. The words he found that night were some of the truest ever spoken about any human being. The light has gone out of our lives, and there is darkness everywhere. The man who had spent 30 years fighting for India's independence had lived 5 months in the free India he helped create. He died trying to hold it together. After the gunshots, after the funeral pyre on the banks of the Yamuna River, after the mourning that spread across the world, people began to ask the question that mattered most. What did he leave behind? Let's start with the practical, the historical, the things you can write in a textbook. Gandhi helped lead 300 million people to independence from the largest empire in human history, without an army, without a single battle, using instead a weapon called Satyagraha, Truth Force, that he invented from scratch, tested in South Africa, refined in India, and offered to the world. Martin Luther King Jr. studied it. He kept a photograph of Gandhi in his office and called him, directly, the guiding light of his own movement. The March on Washington, the bus boycotts, the sit-ins at lunch counters, these are Gandhi's children. Nelson Mandela carried Gandhi's books with him to Robben Island prison, where he spent 27 years confined for fighting apartheid in South Africa, the same country where Gandhi first forged his weapon. Mandela emerged from that prison to lead South Africa to democracy. Lech Wałęsa in Poland, Václav Havel in Czechoslovakia, the student protesters of Tiananmen Square, every movement that has chosen nonviolent resistance since 1948 has walked a path that Gandhi carved. Albert Einstein, the greatest scientist of the 20th century, called Gandhi the greatest man of our age. He said, "Generations to come, it may be, will scarce believe that such a one as this, ever in flesh and blood, walked upon this earth." George Orwell, one of the sharpest and most skeptical writers of the 20th century, a man who disagreed with Gandhi on almost everything political, wrote something that cuts to the heart of it. He said, "Regarded simply as a politician, compared with the other leading political figures of our time, how clean a smell he has managed to leave behind." Gandhi lived his entire life in public view. His personal life was his political life. He had nothing to hide because he had nothing to hide. But let's be honest, completely honest, about who Gandhi was, because the truth is more valuable than a legend. He was a great man, and a flawed man. His early writings about black South Africans used language of prejudice that he later grew to recognize and renounce. His handling of Kasturba's final illness, refusing penicillin, insisting on natural remedies only, was painful and to many unforgivable. His controversial late-life experiments in celibacy caused deep distress to people close to him and remained deeply troubling. His clash with Ambedkar was not a clash between a saint and a troublemaker. It was a clash between two brilliant, passionate, imperfect human beings who both wanted justice and could not agree on how to reach it. Ambedkar was right about things Gandhi could not see. Gandhi was right about things Ambedkar could not see. The truth they were both reaching toward is still being reached for today. Gandhi was born into a caste that the system placed above the very people he eventually called children of God. He had to learn, slowly and imperfectly, to see beyond the world he had been born into. He got things wrong. He kept going. He grew. That is not a stain on his legacy. That is what makes it real. Because here is what Mahatma Gandhi proved, beyond any reasonable doubt. One person, a small person, a person nobody expected anything from, a person who ranked 404th in his province, who froze in his first courtroom, who was thrown off a train on a cold night in South Africa, can change the world. not by being perfect, by refusing to stop. He invented a kind of power the world had never seen before. Not the power of armies, not the power of wealth, the power of a person who has decided that the truth matters more than their own comfort, more than their own safety, more than their own life. To this day, on Fridays, Gandhi's disciples gather at his cremation site in New Delhi and spin cotton on hand wheels. The same motion, the same quiet rhythm, the same charkha he used for decades. It is more than a memorial. It is a reminder that the most revolutionary things are often also the simplest. And that is the hardest kind of power to defeat. Armies can defeat armies. Wealth can buy more wealth. But what do you do with a person who has decided, completely and peacefully and without hatred, that they will not cooperate with injustice? Who absorbs every blow and keeps coming back, not with fists, but with truth? What do you do with that? Gandhi did not win every battle. The country he fought for was divided. The unity he spent his life building cracked along lines that still fracture. The violence he stood against with his own body still exists in the world, in India and everywhere else. He was not a solution. He was something harder to create and harder to defeat. He was a direction. In a world full of noise and rage, in a world that believes power means the ability to hurt people, in a world that is tired and frightened and sometimes willing to do terrible things to feel safe, what would it mean to fight the way Gandhi fought? What would it cost you? Be the change you wish to see in the world. Often attributed to Mahatma Gandhi, the spinning wheel turns, and somewhere the ocean he was born beside is still moving. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, born October 2, 1869, Porbandar, Gujarat, India. Died January 30, 1948, New Delhi, India. 78. Years India lived under British rule after his birth. 78. Years he spent working for Indian independence. 33. Months he lived in free India. 5.